before we begin, and I'm going to be introducing the program and the first two sets of songs, and then our performers will introduce the next two sets of songs. So welcome to the concert portion of our symposium on abolitionism and the arts in the long 18th century. My name is Julia Hamilton, and I am a lecturer in music here at Columbia University. On behalf of the other conference organizers, Stephanie Hershinow, Patricia Matthew, and Berta Joncus, I would like to say thank you to the Columbia Maison Française for allowing us to use their beautiful space tonight. We are also very grateful to the following co-sponsors for their generous support of this event: the Columbia University Seminar in 18th Century European Culture, the Center for Ethnomusicology, the Society of Fellows and Heyman Center for the Humanities, the Columbia Music Department, the Goldsmiths Music Department, the Royal Musical Association, and Music and Letters. Tonight we will be hearing music that intersects with and expands on our theme of abolitionism and the arts in the long 18th century. Awet, Andemicael, and Magdalena Baczewska will be performing for us 4 groups of pieces. They will begin with 2 sets of abolitionist songs. The first set consists of British songs written in the years leading up to the abolition of the slave trade in 1807. The second set features 2 18th century British songs and an American song from the 19th century. 4 of the abolitionist songs featured on this program, this first part of the program, are, to my knowledge, receiving modern-day premieres tonight. Those by John Wall Calcutt, Thomas Hamley Butler, William Carnaby, and a song from William Wells Brown, the Anti-Slavery Harp. After the abolitionist songs, Magdalena Baczewska will perform the third set for us, a group of dance pieces by Ignatius Sancho, a Black British composer who was most famous in his lifetime for writing letters. Sancho died in 1780, 7 years before the widespread popularization of abolitionism in Britain. Nevertheless, his widely circulated critique of slavery in a letter to the novelist Lawrence Sterne, and his prodigious talents in many spheres, what today we might describe as his, quote, black excellence, inspired many to agitate for abolition in the years after his death. Awet and Andemicael will return to the stage for the final part of the program, singing a selection of spirituals that were created by enslaved Black Americans during the 19th century and arranged in the early 20th century by the Black American composer Harry Burleigh. We hope that concluding our program with the music of enslaved people will provide a thought-provoking counterpoint to the anti-slavery music that is featured on the first part of the program, which was largely written by abolitionists who had had no personal experience of slavery. So I'd like to introduce the first part of this program, and then I will invite the performers to come to the stage. In the first part of our program, you will hear songs by William Howard, John Wall Calcutt, and Thomas Hamley Butler. Their songs exemplify typical features of late 18th century British songs that were written in support of abolishing the slave trade. To give you a sense of scope, I've uncovered about 25 songs written from 1787 to 1807 that make kind of explicit anti-slavery messages, and many, many more that touch on ideas of abolitionism that were written in that same period. In terms of the musical style of the songs you'll hear, Howard, Calcutt, and Butler have produced slow songs in major keys. And this may be surprising, but in the 18th century, a slow tempo and an expressive performance could make a major mode song sound just as affecting to contemporaries as a minor mode song. The songs also use strophic form, which means that each new stanza of text is set to the same music. Awet and Magdalena have made a selection of verses from each poem to perform for you tonight, rather than singing for you all of the verses. Some of them have like 8 verses or something. So you can see in the insert with the lyrics which ones that they've decided to perform. If there are more than 4 stanzas, they've chosen the first 2 and the last 2. You will notice in looking at these lyrics that the lyrics of these songs were written from the perspective of an enslaved black person, and that their titles use a term for black person that is considered to be out of date and offensive in the present day. The composers and poets in this group were all white British men who were imagining the experiences of the very real psychological and physical trauma that enslaved black people were currently undergoing in Africa, on the Atlantic, and in the Caribbean. This attempt to sympathize with enslaved people, though well-meaning at the time, is of course out of step with our current modes of activism, in which we attempt to amplify the voices of people who are marginalized and oppressed, rather than to speak or to sing for them. So in our presentation of these songs tonight, we invite you to use 2 modes of listening, historical and presentist. We ask you to listen with historical ears for the musical techniques that 18th century composers found useful in their attempts to support the abolition of the slave trade. But we also invite you to attend to the aspects of these songs that seem uncomfortable and problematic in the present day. And over the course of our day's discussions, we've seen so many examples of things that seem out of step with the way we would frame this sort of problem in the present day. So we invite you to really take care and think about those aspects as well. In our post-concert panel, we will have an opportunity to hear from Awet and Magdalena about their own experiences performing this music for us today. So without further ado, let us welcome Awet Andemicael and Magdalena Baczewska to the stage.
Make the
few remarks on the song that we just heard, and then a few remarks on the next two songs in the set. So if the first three songs that we heard highlighted some similarities of the abolitionist song repertoire, the last one that we just heard and the next two that we are about to hear after this expands our understanding of who composed this type of music and who purchased it in the form of sheet music. The Carnaby song that we just heard and the following song after that remind us of the popularity of abolitionist songs and poems among British women. In the late 18th century, women were encouraged to cultivate their keyboard, vocal, and guitar skills as part of a suite of feminine accomplishments. It is no wonder that the many British women who opposed the slave trade combined their interests in music and abolitionism in this way. In my own research, I have uncovered numerous personal copies of abolitionist songs in women's music collections from around 1800. The Calcutt song that you heard in that first set of songs, for example, appears in 4 different women's collections. So the song that you just heard by William Carnaby is actually a setting of lyrics by a woman, Mary Robinson, who wrote her anti-slavery poem as a narrative ballad. Awet and Magdalena performed the first verse of Robinson's very, very lengthy poem, and you can find the rest of the stanzas that a contemporary singer might have sung in your handout. You'll notice in what you just heard in Carnaby's composition, there's a turn away from that usual slow major key expressiveness. He begins the piece with a dark, brooding D minor introduction, and then only turns to that sweet major key sound midway through the verse. While the song that we just heard by Carnaby features lyrics by a British woman, Miss Greenwood, the next composer on our list, is a rare example of a female composer of an abolitionist song from the 18th century. Greenwood submitted her song to be published in the Ladies' Magazine in 1793. And it was included in the December issue of 1793 and circulated to an estimated 10,000 to 16,000 subscribers to the Ladies' Magazine. As was common at the time, Greenwood submitted her song anonymously, providing the pen name only of, quote, a female correspondent, an amateur. I uncovered her name by chance in an archive of a completely different composer who acknowledged Miss Greenwood's song as the source of his own very, very similar setting of the same poem that you're about to hear. So tonight we have a special opportunity to hear music that was composed by a female amateur musician and to acknowledge her by name as Miss Greenwood. The final song, or the second song that you're about to hear in this second group, expands our view of abolitionist songs still further. We'll hear music from a compilation of anti-slavery songs by William Wells Brown, a Black American abolitionist who was active on the transatlantic anti-slavery lecture circuit in the mid-19th century. In 1848, Brown published The Anti-Slavery Harp, a collection of songs for anti-slavery meetings, and he notes that it was compiled by William W. Brown, a fugitive slave. His collection of songs, some anonymous, some by contemporary white abolitionists, and some composed by himself, begins with an anonymous song called Am I Not a Man and Brother, set to the tune of The Bride's Farewell. This song had already appeared in the Liberty Minstrel, another anti-slavery songbook this time compiled by a white abolitionist named George W. Clark. But in that collection, the Am I Not a Man and Brother is buried deep within that volume. By contrast, Brown chose to place Am I Not a Man and Brother at the start of his volume. It's the very first piece that you see. And it's right under an image that's adapted from the famous anti-slavery medallion that was created by Josiah Wedgwood in the 1780s that we've been talking about so much today. So if you can go, if you have the time, you can look up this anti-slavery harp. It's available on Google Books and just on the internet, and you can see it on that very first page, the image adapted from the anti-slavery medallion, and then this song that clearly is reflecting this. So I'm excited to present this final song to you, which brings together all of the arts that we've been discussing today: visual art, literature, and music. Thanks.
First from home and all its pleasures, Afric's coast I left forlorn, to increase a stranger's treasure, o'er the raging billows borne, o'er the raging billows borne. to be sold. Minds are never to be sold. Still in thought as free as ever, what are England's rights, I ask me from my delights to sever, me to torture, me to task, me to torture, me to task. Fleecy locks and black complexion cannot forfeit nature's claim. Skins may differ, but affection dwells in black and white the same, dwells in black, dwells in black and white the same. By our blood in Afric wasted, here our necks received the chain. By the miseries we have tasted, crossing in your box the main, crossing in your box the main. By your suffering, since you brought us to the man-degrading mart, all sustained by patience taught us, only by a broken heart, by a broken, only by a broken heart. Deem our nation brute no longer, till some reason you shall find worthier of regard and stronger than the color of our kind, than the color of our
must make a confession. You already noticed this in your program. I got carried away and I started the second set. So it is totally my fault, and thank you, Julia, for improvising. So well. You're about to hear two sets of short dance pieces by Ignatius Sancho. Born in around 1729 on a slave ship, Ignatius Sancho is a writer, composer, shopkeeper, a family man, and an abolitionist. Sancho is also the first known person of African descent to vote in a British general election. In 1776, Sancho wrote a letter to novelist Lawrence Sterne, introducing himself as a black man who taught himself to read and write. In this letter, Sancho asks the novelist to devote half an hour's attention to slavery. The letter marks the beginning of an extensive exchange and a friendship with Sterne. The titles of some of the pieces you're about to hear this afternoon contain references to Sancho's anti-slavery thought, as well as passages from Sterne's novel Tristram Shandy. These dances come from a formerly lost volume of Sancho's Cotillions, etc., published in 1776. The volume was not found until 2015 and was acquired by Harvard University. I'd like to draw your attention to especially the first two titles. The Runaway, which, according to Julia Hamilton's research, very extensive research, may refer to Sancho's own experience as a child. He was, as I mentioned, born on a slave ship and sold to 3 unmarried women, from whom he eventually ran away. The title could also denote a generalized idea of a runaway slave, a symbol of slave resistance. I should also add that in Runaways, as the performer's note, nearly every note has its own articulation marking. It is the most meticulously notated piece in the whole collection. The feathers, again according to Dr. Hamilton's research, the title refers to a passage in Sterne's novel, Tristram Shandy, which depicts a black girl in a shop swatting flies with a bunch of feathers, and we read from Sterne, she had suffered persecution and had learned mercy. The minuet, although it is a French court dance, gives me an opportunity to explain cotillions. They were social dances performed in couples, and the music would usually be played several times over until all the couples finished their choreography. I will only play each tune twice. Vive le Roi is a beautiful fanfare, which again goes back to a passage in Sterne's novel. Shandy Hall is a name of a character, is a name of a house in one of the characters in the novel. What's really lovely and interesting in Shandy Hall is the drum bass, which really brings us to the countryside, to the pastoral. And tant mieux, it's one of the two pieces that probably should go together, tant pis and tant mieux. Again, in Sterne's own words, those two expressions being two of the great hinges in French conversation. A stranger would do well to set himself right in the use of them before he gets to Paris. All of these pieces are set in a two-part texture, and they would have been played on the harpsichord. I'm going to play them here on the modern piano. They could have easily been played on a flute and or a violin accompanied by basso continuo. So what I'll try to do is the second time around I play a particular melody, I'll try to very subtly realize the figured bass so you get a picture of the harmonies. The second set and the last three pieces come from Sancho's 12 country dances for the harpsichord, published in 1779, the year before the composer's death. I'd like to direct your attention to the title of the last piece, Mungo's Delight. Mungo was a black-faced character, a caricature of a black person. And what Sancho seems to be doing here is indirectly articulate his anti-racist position here by bringing up the character of Mungo and highlighting the racial prejudice of the British society. You will notice a rather unusual, very disjunct melody, which makes this piece stand out among all the other very smooth and singable ones.
final set is comprised of African American spirituals, as Julia has already told us. Like the piano works we just heard by Sancho and the text to Am I Not a Man and Brother, presumably, these words, melodies, and arrangements were created by people of African descent. Many of you, probably all of you, are very well versed in the history and character and stories around African American spirituals. But just in case some of you aren't, you should know that most traditional spirituals were created, of course, by enslaved Africans whose names we do not know, bringing together their own diverse cultural, artistic forms, their own personal and communal creativity with the biblical narratives and musical idioms they encountered in the lands of their exile. Prior to the American Civil War, spirituals were an exclusively oral art form, generally rendered a cappella and sung in a range of contexts, including worship, work, and communal entertainment. The lyrics of many spirituals had multiple levels of meaning. This is a well-known feature of African American spirituals, especially the way we read them in 20th century and 21st century contexts. Many express the personal pain caused by human trafficking, like the spiritual Sometimes I Feel Like a Motherless Child. Others, like Steal Away in the Gospel Train, which we'll hear today, or Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Wade in the Water, were used to convey specific coded messages related to plans for escape, for example, by means of the Underground Railroad. Still others contain powerful protests against the injustices of slavery, expressed secretly by associating enslaved Africans with the biblical people of Israel escaping slavery in Egypt, as in Go Down Moses and Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. In his autobiography, abolitionist Frederick Douglass wrote the following about the spirituals. To those songs I trace my first glimmering conceptions of the dehumanizing character of slavery. I can never get rid of that conception. Those songs still follow me to deepen my hatred of slavery and quicken my sympathies for my brethren in bonds. After the Civil War, many melodies and texts of spirituals were collected and published, later recorded by anthropologists, folklorists, and musicologists. Some were arranged for choral or solo concert performance and made popular by touring and recording ensembles like the Fisk Jubilee Singers, as well as concert artists like Roland Hayes, Marian Anderson, and Paul Robeson. Many African American gospel musicians throughout the 20th and 21st centuries have drawn frequently on spirituals repertoire for church and concert music. Some songs in particular, like Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, have become popular vehicles beyond religious contexts and have been covered by a wide range of musicians. I should have looked up, a selective range, but you've all heard those versions, from jazz to pop artists. The spirituals we will now hear were all arranged for concert performance by Harry T. Burleigh, a composer, arranger, and concert baritone, active in the early half of the 20th century. Burleigh himself was the grandson of a slave, and he learned traditional spirituals and slave songs directly from his grandfather. He went on to a distinguished career as a classically trained musician, studying at the National Conservatory of Music in New York. Antonin Dvorak, the composer, was director of the conservatory at that time, and Burleigh is credited as the one who introduced Dvorak to the spirituals repertoire, which would feature memorably in the latter's New World Symphony.
Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child.
That was unbelievably inspiring. I have tears in my eyes. I'll just try to get myself together here. That was so unbelievable. Thank you, both of you, these really great artists. And now we have this wonderful opportunity, actually, to talk to the artists and discuss their processes for choosing, what's kind of the selection process they go through. And you are very, very warmly welcome to also ask some questions. So there'll be, I'm not sure, will there be a microphone being passed around, or how is that going to work? Okay, that's fine. You'll have to really talk up, and I can also repeat the question into the microphone, so it's not a problem. So we'll just rearrange our furniture here a little bit. So when I was actually, just a little bit of background, Julie and I have had this idea since 2019 at least to try to put together what's become this amazing concert. And there's this repertory that's out there that Julia mentioned. My first question then to the artists was how their selection process, not just for the abolition songs in two parts, the abolition songs, and then also the spirituals that in some way kind of resonate in them. So I'll just...
Sure, I can say a bit about that. The selections of the abolitionist songs were done primarily in conversation with Berta and Julia. I had sung some of this repertoire before at a previous program that I'd worked on with Berta, so I was a little bit familiar with some of it. And then Julia introduced us to a wider range. So it was we were looking for music that would be representative of what was typical, but also musically interesting, because we wanted to sit through it, so we didn't want to... Oh my goodness. So while they are typical, they often have a little something that's a little bit different, a little bit interesting. So that was one aspect. For the one of the things that came up when I was discussing the repertoire with Julia is that there's so little of this repertoire that actually represents the voices of people of African descent. So this is why we thought it would make sense to include a set of spirituals arranged by an African American, so that it at least brings the actual voice. Now it's a very specifically curated voice arranged for concert performance, very different from the experience that enslaved people would have had in the context of slavery. It would have been a cappella, very different vocal method, so quite different. And I have complicated feelings about the ways in which traditional musics make their way into the concert hall, and it's fraught with all sorts of complications you can imagine, but this was one way that we could bring it in as a conversation between African and European influences. So that was sort of the idea. The other thing is that in choosing the spirituals, I was careful to make sure I chose songs that were not just laments, but also songs that exercised agency and were songs of protest, even if they had to be couched in biblical language. So it was very important to me to include that. And even some references to the fact that it did take violence, unfortunately, and bloodshed for the institution of slavery to end in the United States, at least in North America. So that the threat that if this doesn't happen, this will happen. Unfortunately, that is what it took in the United States, although it was a different trajectory, obviously, in Great Britain.
How about the keyboard works? I wanted to know how you selected from the wealth of dances that were written. Which ones?
I learned so much from doing this concert and exploring the works that Julia has shared with us. Very extensive documents, so there's much more material if you're interested. And you went around the world looking in libraries for those must have been original editions of the pieces. So it was a great pleasure to actually play from the real thing. And what I chose was, again, based on Julia's research, in terms of references to abolitionism and anti-racist thought, but there are also some wonderful pieces that I chose simply for their musical merit. For example, the minuet or Shandy Hall. I thought that Sancho really paints the pictures in each very short piece very vividly. So I was guided by these two interests.
Yeah, great, wonderful. My other the question in my mind is also something you touched on, Awet, was the kind of challenges that this repertory poses, which Julia talked to at the beginning too, is how we frame things so differently now, and being faced with this old style framing of these questions. Sometimes the music itself, of course, has its technical challenge, but perhaps on a deeper level, there are those identity politics questions that you need to address, and how you negotiate that within your practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I can say there was one line in a song where I was inwardly cringing, though black yet comely. I said, but for historical reasons, I sang it straight. I did not show it. I hope I didn't show it in my face. But it's actually, it just feels like a dagger to the chest. Anyway, so it's terrible. Although there's another. So some of these texts that are, again, written and were performed with, I'm sure, the best of intentions in order to overcome, to undermine the institution of slavery, and yet would reinforce racialized stereotypes and racialized discrimination, whether wittingly or unwittingly. So that was, but at least in the songs that we chose, that didn't happen quite so much.
Yeah.
There is just the issue that Julia mentioned in her opening remarks about the fact that these were people of European descent speaking for people of African descent, and that is another level of complication. Again, for historical purposes, it's valuable, but it's complicated. It makes it difficult to think, well, what options did they think they had, and what options did they know they had? In the 18th century, less so. In the 19th century, it becomes clear that there are a wider range of options, that you can lift up the voices of enslaved or formerly enslaved people and encourage their work and lift up their work rather than feel that you have to speak for them. But, I'm not sure if I'm in a place to judge them, given that and I'm thankful for some things that they did, but it's deeply problematic, especially for me as a black person singing it.
Absolutely.
One other element I will say is that it's interesting, Magdalena and I were speaking about this. Neither of us was born in the United States or Britain. And I sort of sing this repertoire as a black person, but an immigrant black person from Africa. So it's also complicated for me to navigate what it means for me to sing this repertoire. Essentially, even the spirituals repertoire is representing a heritage that is not quite my own, but at the same time I'm associated with more closely than others. So that's something that I'm still struggling with and trying to navigate how to do. I mean, if it's an art song written by an African American composer, there's no question. That's obviously written for anyone to sing. But there's some repertoires where there's some moral dilemmas, I think, involved, and I don't always feel that it's in some contexts appropriate. In other contexts, it is appropriate for me to do so. So again, it's just whose voice am I channeling? And it's easy to, I have brown skin and I'm black, so you can check me off a list that, it's probably less problematic to hear me sing, the word Negro, for example, than someone who looks different from me. But it's a different heritage and it's a different tradition. So there's much more nuance to what it means to be black in Europe, in the United States, and all over the world. Yeah. And I think some of those nuances get lost sometimes when we're making these decisions about what repertoire we sing.
That's so interesting what you're saying. If I might just add, here at Columbia, both of us and I see some other instructors who teach music humanities, and in my section we devote an entire class to spirituals, and it's always a very heated discussion. We mentioned, the problematic nature of bringing traditional music, especially of the enslaved Black Americans, to the concert stage, and the students have very strong opinions about this, and they initially actually cringe at the notion of concert spirituals. It is not until they are explained that this was actually something that was created in the historically black colleges and universities that they start realizing the depth of it. That's just something I want to add.
Yeah, you just can't get away from the identity politics. But the thing is about music is that I think every musician, and in fact every listener by extension, is entering into different identities when they are engaging. So I'm thinking also about the keyboard works by Sancho that were, of course, also kind of assumed identities because of French dances. And I feel that, there's always this play of embrace and distancing going on at the same time. But I do want to give everybody else a chance, if there's anybody out there, also the people who are attending our wonderful symposium, if you would like to address any questions to the artists on the back of some of the discussions we've had today. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ms. Baczewska, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Perfect.
Thanks for your note over here. In reading your biographical sketch, I see you've had experience with, quote, collaborations with techno and hip-hop artists.
That's
Could you
correct.
please discuss that?
Oh, yes. It actually is something that was born out of the pandemic lockdown, when our creative juices kept flowing, and yet we were unable to release them out to the world. I happen to have two friends who, one of them is a composer who wrote a concerto for me called Hip Harpsichord, and it is for the harpsichord and a hip hop track. We recorded it remotely, and it's actually available on the streaming services if you're interested in looking at it. And another one of those pandemic collaborations which happened remotely also was a remix of a piece that a composer and DJ created, and asked me to respond to the music with an improvisation on the piano and on the harpsichord.
Apparently the COVID experience is not altogether bad.
I would definitely not repeat it,
Very
but we
strong.
tried.
I brought out some very interesting spontaneous reactions and very inventive responses too. But I think one of the reasons we are so thrilled to be here, Julie and I, is that all of us can be literally in a room together. And I'm sure actually we all experience together the difference in quality of experience in being here in this room in this time to hear this music. Music is something that's embodied, and this is something that also Julie and I in our work are, I think, straining to get across to an academic audience, is that music is something that's sounded, it's embodied, and it's experienced in the body. So it cannot be just taken as something. It was sometimes only read, but most of the time it was encoded in this thing we call notation in order to provoke some kind of reaction. And I think this is often where abolition song is playing with that space between the embodiment and the page. But any other questions that are maybe out there? Yes, John.
From both the piano and the voice standpoint, probably lots of us here heard lots of song recitals and thought about the subjects that people used to sing to each other about in previous centuries, and also the musical forms it took. Within the first piece, to my ear, it sounded a little like conventional Mozart songs that he wrote. And so how does what we heard today, and then there are Aaron Copland songs too from another century, so how do these fit in with all the other repertoire you're accustomed to doing in terms of what people in different times sung to each other about, and the musical forms they use to express that?
No, that's a great question. In fact, performing this music in this concert setting has been really interesting because, yes, as you mentioned, some of these 18th century pieces sound like maybe Mozart arias, piano reductions, and yet when you listen to the text, to the lyrics, your heart just sinks. And so the contrast of some of these, as you mentioned, Julia, you mentioned the major mode songs that are just happen to be slow, delivered in a certain way. The responsibility on the performer is huge in this case to deliver with them with the seriousness that they deserve. And same goes for the spirituals. As performers, we always have to balance between creative choices as well as sticking to what the composer meant, right, to the written score. And so the spirituals feel, as you mentioned, much more like maybe a Copland song or actually an art song lead, right, in terms of realizing the notation. We as in our rehearsals, we were For example, looking at the various texts and whether we could take liberties in, let's say, continuing a phrase that was initially maybe broken up, just because the text requires that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, for the abolitionist songs, in some cases, like Miss Greenwood's song, she actually. Miss Greenwood is actually pretty precise about indicating where she wants you to take liberty, ad libitum, and then other places. Whereas a lot of the other ones are not. But of course, it's strophic, so you have to decide are you going to do it every verse or not. Whereas the other ones, it's more generically notated, so we have some leeway to play around with it, which is helpful because it's strophic. And yeah, for me, even though, as you mentioned at the beginning, Julia, this was not an unusual thing to have a sort of an affect of pathos connected with a major key, it took not just the major key, but the kind of Clementi bass, for me, is not something I associate with something, a deep pathos. So trying to find a way to express a really pain-laden text in a way that doesn't go overboard. It's not overly melodramatic that it no longer matches the music, but it actually expresses the text effectively. That was a challenge. I think for the Burley settings, arrangements, he's an excellent composer and an excellent arranger, and he himself was a singer. So there were some times where we were thinking, oh, we'll play around with it. And I said, no, actually, let's do what he wrote. And most of the time, it's really effective to do essentially what he wrote. Right. A couple of times I did a bit of ornamentation. I did a little bit of variation, but most of the time we stuck primarily to what he was writing because he does such a good job in bringing it across. And yeah, I would imagine that a lot of sort of think of Copland and Britten and other composers who've set folk melodies. This is in that same line, I think, except in his case, the folk element is very engaging, but it also has such a profound social justice dimension to it that I don't think is quite as embedded in your typical English or Irish or Appalachian folk song. Although, to be fair, there's a lot of social justice and a lot of kind of socioeconomic and socio-political content to be found in those songs as well. I think we just typically don't think about them that way, whereas we do about spirituals. Yeah. So actually, as I'm saying, actually, no. Let me correct myself. It's all much more complex, but we tend to think, oh, it's a folk song. Partly because of the normativity of European cultures, to be fair, that we don't think that it actually expresses particular ethnic backgrounds, particular socioeconomic situations, particular gendered relations, all sorts of things. So the deeper you go, the more you can find it in those settings as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can just add one quick thing, something one regret that I have in when we put the program together is that because of logistical and musical and other considerations, we just used arrangements by Burley, but there are a number of wonderful arrangements by African American women, Margaret Bonds being an obvious person, and I think ideally we would have had more of a mix of different perspectives, because the voice of African American women or women of African descent was essentially, except for me, and was essentially missing from the whole program. So we had European American or European women, but no women of African descent, and that's a real regret on my part, and I think it would be something to correct in future. Yeah, because there's some extraordinary settings by African American women and other composers. Yeah.
It's true. But with your presence, we didn't feel anything.
Well,
no, exactly. Yeah. Well, all I can say is that means that you're going to have to do another concert. Exactly. This could be just the start of a series. I do hope it is, because there is a lot of repertory out there of which people are unaware. And because when it comes to music of the past, particularly I think in the 18th century, we are very constrained by what the recording companies have decided is going to be part of the canon also for early music now. We thought of that moment in the 1980s and 90s where we were all released from that kind of thing. It's like, no, it's become reinstated. But that's a different conversation. But it is kind of part of what I know Julie and I were trying to do in our aims with this concert. However, are there other questions out there? Burning away. Yes, thank you. Sure.
You mentioned that Miss Greenwood is not, not much is known about her. Is there any speculation of who the individual might be?
Do you? Yes. I think that's a good Julia.
Do you
have thoughts, Julia?
I do speculate. So the composer who said my song is altered from Miss Greenwood's song. it's a manuscript, and he didn't publish it, and he dedicated it to one of his music students. His name is R.J.S. Stevens, and he had a lot of women music students that he went around, giving them lessons and putting on concerts in their homes and things like that. So if my money is on one of his students, I don't know. Of course, if this woman would have been white or black, the population statistics suggest is most likely she would have been white. But there were black women who were living in Berkeley this time, so I don't really want to, say for sure either way. That's all I got. There is a Mrs. Greenwood in R.J.S. Stevens's letters. Anyway, not a smoking gun.
Thank you so much. Was there any other questions back there? I don't want to miss anyone. So, yes, sure, of course.
Looking at your biographical sketch, Berta,
Yeah.
I see among your specialisms is 18th century music celebrity culture. 18th century musical celebrity culture. Any juicy gossip?
Oh, juicy gossip is where I live. So, yes, I spent 20 years actually on a monograph of a particular celebrity called Kitty Clive, who was actually the subject of my DPhil at Oxford, and then I went on and published a bunch of other things, and came back and realized I got the story all wrong. So so I had to rewrite it, didn't I? And it wasn't rewritten, but I did. Suddenly the scales fell from my eyes. So it's really actually about how the singer can use music to promote their own celebrity in their own spaces. And what was great about the 18th century was the spaces were in the home, so a Miss Greenwood could compose music. Various Miss Greenwoods and others could perform quite provocative music, but also the public stages at that time were open to all kinds of improvisatory gestures so that singers in productions live could introduce their own songs and actually perform them as they wished to. And that became a type of entertainment, so people didn't know what was happening. It was more like a jazz, coming to hear a jazz performance, and you didn't know what was going to happen in the night. So it'd be within a drama, but then the music would be something quite provocative. And that's what the subject of my monograph did, but I think there are many other performers. I know there are many other performers out there who did this. So celebrity becomes a means of empowerment, which I would say is not so much the case today, that celebrities could really own the place of their performance and decide and write their own scripts and so on in their own music. So that is what my interest is, and it's gone out from there, but I can also see it playing out in the abolitionist song as well, not least from the women, obviously, who were writing the music, writing the verses, and performing in their own spaces. Yeah. Thank you for that question. Yeah. Other questions? Never fear, because if you would like to answer questions but you don't particularly want to do so in a public forum, we have a beautiful reception waiting for you in the next room over there, where you could have something cool to drink, some wine, some cheese, and we can continue to talk to the artists who have given so much and so generously. Again, thanks.